We are.
Yay!
All right. Yay. Hello, everyone. Mathew Heggem. Welcome to today's Accounting Alchemy Network live streaming webinar. We are so excited to be here. I think this is our third Lyceum now.
Yes.
So we're up and running. So if you haven't had a chance to tune in, we did a great one a few weeks ago, I should say, with Jana Etienne on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We had a lovely conversation weeks before that with Gail Perry from Accounting Today.
Nope, CPA Practice Advisor.
No, I always say that kind of CPA Practice Advisor. Sorry, Gail. Yeah, and it's been a great sort of beginning adventure to really this community that Ingrid and I are building, and hoping to bring more people into this space around this conversation of how do we empower accountants to transform the world. And really ultimately to make this profession a vehicle for positive change. So today we have a lovely conversation planned for you with Steve Pipe, who is our guest on the topic of taking climate action. So Steve, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to our viewers today?
Matthew, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. It's a real pleasure and privilege to be here. I am a 60-year-old, sort of retired, UK-based chartered accountant. Set up my own accounting practice, used to be FD of head of finance for a 140 million division of Kodak before they disappeared, and more recently built a 40-person consulting business advising and supporting accountants. I'm passionate about the accounting profession and have been ever since I joined it, but I'm even more passionate about the potential that the accounting profession has to really make a profound difference, whether that's to climate change or any of the other issues that we are crying out socially and globally for people to take a lead. And I think we have that wonderful opportunity to take a lead and really re-establish ourselves as the drivers of global success in the widest possible sense. So yeah, that's me.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Steve. So let's dive into climate action, because I know we could probably talk about this topic for days, and I want to really use our time as effectively as possible today. So let's talk, what is the issue? I know that climate action has a lot of skepticism around it in many communities, and people are sort of all over with it. Can you describe what the issue is for us and kind of summarize it?
Well, yes. I need to preface this with a very clear statement that I'm certainly not, and I suspect that you aren't, Ingrid or Matthew isn't, or indeed any of us watching this, an expert in this area. I mean, there are plenty of experts out there. What we actually need to galvanize is a mass movement. We need everybody, not just experts, buying into this and doing something and taking action with this. So that's where I come at it from, as someone who cares passionately, isn't an expert, certainly not a scientist. My 2 degrees were in economics, and my professional career has been in the accounting space. So I'm not an expert, but I have as much at stake as each and every one of us does, which is the future planet for me, my family, my loved ones, and everyone else and everything else that I care about. So given that I'm not an expert, my assessment of the situation is this: that there is absolutely a risk. We'll come on to put in some percentages on the risk, but there is a risk that climate change will lead to flooding like we've never seen before, storms like we've never seen before, those things leading to disruption of all sorts like we've never seen before, damage like we've never seen before on a global scale, those things leading to shortage of drinking water like we've never seen before, crop failure like we've never seen before, infestations of rats and insects like we've never seen before. We've seen some of that already. Animal extinction like we've never seen before, food shortages like we've never seen before, those things leading to illness, pain, death, and destruction like we've never seen before. So that's the deep and dark picture, as it were. Now, I'm not a scientist. I can't judge the probability of those things. I said there's a risk. I can't judge the probability, but when I look at what most scientists say there's a very high probability that some and many of those things will happen. And then there are a few skeptics at the other end of the scale that say, well, there's a much lower probability. But I don't think you'll find a single scientist anywhere who says that the probability of those things happening is 0%. Everybody accepts that there is a chance, there is a risk that those things happen. We just don't know exactly what the percentage is. And let's face it, actually, none of us really do know. But I don't think that matters, because let's just step back and say, well, what do we always do in the face of risk? And there are many, many risks that I don't fully understand, but I take two bits of action around, and each and every one of us individually and collectively as societies and governments takes two bits of action. When we're faced with risks that could really hurt, we do two things. We insure against them, and we do what we can to mitigate, to prevent the thing happening in the first place, and to have an insurance policy just in case it does happen. Now, I don't understand, we have insurance policies for our mobile phones, for our pets, for our white goods in our houses. We've got insurance policies on our cars and our holidays and our homes, the buildings, the contents, our health. We actually don't understand the probability risk of any one of those things actually happening. What's the probability of my phone smashing, or my white goods breaking down, or my pet getting ill? I don't need to understand the probability to know that it is sensible to insure and mitigate, to do what I can to stop my cat being run over by a car by locking the gate or whatever, and have some insurance in place in the event that it does get run over by a car. I don't understand the percentages, and it doesn't matter. And it's exactly the same, I think, with big issues like climate change. We don't understand as non-scientists the probability. We can't put an exact figure on it. So what? Is there a risk that could really hurt? Yes. Well, what do all sensible people do in the face of risks that could really hurt? We insure and we mitigate, and we need to do exactly that with climate change. Otherwise, those things, that illness, pain, death, destruction, crop shortages, hunger, animal extinction, all those things like we've never seen before just might happen. And if it's important enough to insure our flipping mobile phones and everything else that we insure, surely it's important enough to take out some kind of insurance policy against those risks too, which is why we have to take action.
Fantastic, thank you. So when it comes to that action, and we're not scientists, like you said, when it comes to that, where do accounting professionals come in? Why do we specifically need to do something?
We have the ear, we have a relationship, a trusted relationship with pretty much every business in the country, in the world as a profession, our clients, but not just our clients, those people that aren't yet our clients, but who may become our clients because we play a leadership role in an issue that matters. So there's a double-edged benefit here. There's a benefit to the planet of playing a leadership role, but there's also a benefit to our practices, because if we are seen as the firm that cares enough to do something and that cares enough to help our clients to do something, then a certain kind of client will be attracted to us, and we actually may find that helps us to grow. So there's that. And as human beings, we all need to do something. It's just we as accountants are perfectly placed to do more than most, through being the change we want to see ourselves in a Gandhi kind of style, but then by doing what needs to be done within our own businesses, effectively reducing our carbon footprint and offsetting it, those two things together, I suggest, that then will inspire others to do the same. And we have a real opportunity, not just to inspire others, but actually to support and equip others. We can launch services which help other businesses reduce their carbon footprint. How awesome would that be? We could actually become the providers of support in this area and earn fees for it, earn value-based fees, because the value we will be creating is enormous. And the really exciting, going back to my insurance premium metaphor, the really exciting thing is globally, my understanding is that globally over the last couple of years, we have spent something like 13% of global GDP tackling COVID. This thing that we didn't see and then hit us, and we galvanized, every corner of our economies, the scientific corner and every other corner, to tackle COVID. If we had to spend 13% of GDP tackling climate change, we might recoil in horror and say that's impossible. The good news is if we do something now, the cost is 1 or 2%. If we leave it for another 5 years, the cost probably will be 13%. It's so much more sensible to act now whilst the cost is cheap. It's incredibly doable. If we could galvanize the world to tackle COVID and spend that much money on it, we can absolutely galvanize the world to tackle climate change. We just have to play a leading role in making that happen.
Agreed. And thank you, Steve. And you sort of peppered in some examples of perhaps some things people could do. But before we sort of galvanize the world and galvanize the profession, subsequently. I'm curious if you could step back for a moment and just maybe answer the question, like what motivated you to actually become inspired to take action and make this a topic that you really wanted to focus on?
We have three adult children, and I was just saying to you guys beforehand, we just found out a couple of weeks ago that we're about to be grandparents for the first time. You know, my children and their children, all of our children and their children, grandchildren, whether or not they're actually ours or they're just others that we love, those yet to come that we don't even know yet, but we know we are going to love, the entire quality of their lives, the entire quality of their existence is in our hands today. It's almost as if, you know, future generations are dangling over a cliff edge. We are standing at the top of the cliff, and they are holding on by their fingertips to our fingertips. We have this binary choice. We either let them go and crash to this hideous future with all of those possible things that we talked about before, or we take action now to pull them back from the cliff edge and save them. It's as simple as that. I'm not willing to let my children and grandchildren crash to that hideous future. I could never square that with my moral compass or my heart. I could never look them in the eye and say I didn't do everything I possibly could. And I do not understand how anybody else could look in 10 or 20 years' time, their children and grandchildren in the eyes and say, well, I didn't do anything because I didn't know. We all know. We're just choosing to ignore, or we're telling the big lie. And the big lie, and Anthony Guterres said this the other day, and I'd love to pull up the quote in a second, I will do, but the big lie is essentially, I'll do it tomorrow, because tomorrow never comes. There is only today, and tomorrow we always put off and put off and put off. With your permission, I'm just going to share a quote which for me sums up and is visual. So I'm going to share my screen. For me, it's not that one, and it's down here. You'll see it in a second. It's this one. So this is the BBC's website back a couple of weeks ago in April when the IPCC issued its most recent report. And I've highlighted a couple of quotes from the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. Some government and business leaders are saying one thing but doing another. Simply put, they are lying, and the results will be catastrophic. The lie is we'll do it tomorrow. They're kicking it into the long grass. It's always been, and it always will be unless we stand up tomorrow. And if we keep kicking it into the long grass, if we keep lying to ourselves and accepting the lie that we don't have to do it today, we can do it tomorrow, then we're going to hit those unprecedented heat waves, those terrifying storms, that widespread water shortage, and all those other things we talked about before. We simply have to stop accepting that lie, and we have to start leading the fight against that lie, which means taking the action that we can take. Now, I'm not an activist. You will not find, I'm not an activist. You will not find me out on streets, corners, protesting. You will not find me shouting at other people for what they are not doing. You know, I don't criticize people that choose to do it that way. For me, it's about being an actionist. It's about taking the action you can yourself, not blaming others, but taking the action you can and using that action to hopefully act as some kind of illustration, some kind of inspiration. Again, back to Gandhi, being the change we want to see. I think that's so much more productive than standing on street corners with huge placards saying, you aren't doing anything to reduce your carbon footprint. We need to take action ourselves.
Absolutely. I love that. I absolutely love what you just said, Steve, as far as, you know, pulling our children and grandchildren back up off this cliff. There's a fantastic poem that I don't remember off the top of my head who it's by. I'm going to have to find it and post it in the Accounting Alchemy Network social groups, because this person is saying that they can't sleep at night because the voices of their great-grandchildren are saying to them in their head at night, what did you do when the world was burning?
Yeah.
What did you do? Did you do anything when all these terrible things were happening? What did you do? And it's such a beautiful poem and just calls to mind exactly what you were just saying. And I think an important thing to keep in mind with that is some of the deeply rooted cultural belief systems that are going on that are perpetuating this problem, particularly as we get into the money and finance side of things and what we as accounting professionals can do to shift some of those beliefs and understandings. And I think that your example of insurance and mitigation is hitting the nail right on the head, while also keeping in mind that insurance doesn't stop the problem.
Yeah.
You can bring out
absolutely.
an insurance policy that, gives you some kind of financial kickback if your cat gets hit, but when it comes down to it, a cat's lifespan is a cat's lifespan. And at some point, we're going to lose our beloved pet, and it's going to be heartbreaking, whether that be a car hitting it or, some health thing, or, whatever the case. That insurance does not protect us from heartbreak, and that we're going to have those hard emotions.
You're absolutely right, Ingrid. And I use insurance as my sort of way of thinking about it, not because we actually can buy an insurance policy that protects us against it. I mean, metaphorically, because when you think about it, what is insurance? Insurance is we pay some money now, we call it the insurance premium, in order to, just in case things go bad in the future, we've got some kind of protection against it, haven't we? So what I'm thinking in terms of is, the insurance premium on my house is, I don't know, $1,000 just in case it burns down in any given calendar year. I pay money every year. I hope it never burns down. I actually hope that the risk of that never comes to light, but I happily pay my $1,000. I think we need to view the cost of taking action as our insurance premium, the money we spend today to make sure that tomorrow is not hideous. That's what insurance is, effectively. We spend money now, hoping that we really, in the final analysis, didn't actually need to. That's always the case. I don't take out health insurance because I'm hoping to have a heart attack and then actually claim on the policy. I never want a heart attack, thank you very much. But I take out the insurance anyway. I put money aside now. Instead of spending it on other stuff, I choose to spend it on something to protect me in the future. And that's what I mean by insurance. There isn't a policy that will make it all good, that we can pay some big conglomerate insurance company. It's actually taking a portion of our global income, and that's why I talked about, they say it's a couple of percent globally.
Yeah,
we have to do this individually. Our governments and our societies and our nations, and collectively as a planet, we need to do this. We need to galvanize resources and be willing to sacrifice some of today's consumption, because that's what it boils down to, in order to provide the protection for us in the future. I don't think that's asking too much. We do that with regular insurance. And the alternative, you say, well, I couldn't be bothered to do that. It was way more important that I had more cups of latte and went on more global travel trips and had a bigger car and so on. And basically, sod you, my grandchildren. And that's complete. I'm sorry, apologies for my language, but sometimes only some words convey what's actually at stake. We would, with hindsight, we will hate ourselves if we actually go down that route. We have to recognize that now and consequently change our behavior now.
Yes. Well, and getting back to the insurance policy, it's not all about money. Yes, investing a couple percent of our GDP right now would be a fantastic way to shift this tide. And in order for that to shift, we also need to shift our thinking. We need to change the way that we interact with our planet, with each other, with money in general, and the way that we make our choices. Who do we buy from, and where do those products really come from? What happens to them when we throw them away?
Yeah.
There
is no away, is there? There is no away. You don't actually throw them to a place called away. It just becomes someone else's problem somewhere else, don't they? And we don't have to pay the proper cost of that, in economic terms, do we? So you're absolutely right. We need to, there's a lot of brutal truths that we need to face up to. I mean, bottom line is, we are each and every one of us, including no doubt the three of us on this call and everybody else watching it, consuming more than we really should be. I don't mean because we can't afford it at a personal level, because we've got this system that means we can notionally afford it, but planetarily, in terms of global resources, we in the West are over-consuming, over-exploiting. We are stripping our planet naked. So there are so many fundamental changes. Those are quite hard for people to buy into straight away. So we have to, I think, for me, the key is always to starting with the simple stuff and use the simple stuff to create some traction, create some mileage, and then use that thin end of the wedge to lead to more and more and more profound change. Yes, we need to do those things quickly, but if we try and run a marathon at the beginning or try and do something really hard at the beginning, what happens? We fail and we give up. So we need to, whilst we absolutely need to greatly reduce, for example, our energy consumption, at the moment, we've still probably got the car on the drive that consumes a certain amount of energy and fuel, gas, or whatever every time we go in it. So there are things we can do, but we need to focus on the easy things first, the simpler things first, recognizing that's not enough, but it is a great place to start. And it's way better than the I'll do it tomorrow. The big lie. The big lie is I'll do it tomorrow. And that excuses us from doing anything today. And it's always today. Tomorrow never comes. It hasn't come so far, and it won't come in the future. We have to buy into the idea of change now, today.
So I'm gonna just jump in, Ingrid, and I don't quite know if this fits in with the flow that we'd planned, but I want to respond. So yeah, yes, today, yes, simple action. What does that look like, right? Like, what does actual simple action look like, right? And then I guess I get curious, and I say this because I had a conversation with a couple of colleagues yesterday, where they were generally concerned with the state of affairs on the planet, but to the degree that they were like, it doesn't matter, because unless ExxonMobil or insert XYZ big corporation here changes, there's nothing we can do as individuals, right? It's like that sort of, well, the throw in the towel, we have no power sort of mentality. So I'm curious, first of all, what is your response to that attitude or that belief set? And then subsequently, how do you translate that individual simple action into a collective opportunity to create change?
Yeah, we can always, if we choose to, we can always hide behind the I'm only one small cog in the wheel, and therefore it's no point in me changing because it doesn't actually shift the dial in any meaningful extent, except that we have that zero-sum game. I don't know whether that's the right language, but we all lose if we all take that view. We all each have to step up and recognize our own responsibility. And as we do that, more and more people will follow us. And there's that story, isn't there? That sort of apocryphal story of the person walking on the beach, and they come across a young child, and the young child's picking up a starfish that's stranded on the beach and throwing it back into the water, and the beach is strewn with starfish, and the person who's walking along says, what's the point of doing that? You can't possibly make a difference. Look at all the starfish. And the kid picks up another one, throws it in and said, well, I made a difference to that one, didn't I? Each and every little action makes a difference. It contributes. And if we're not even willing to take the little actions as little people, we cannot expect anybody else to act either. So yes, I understand that there has to be much more change than we ourselves can create. But if we don't even change the things we can create, we don't have any right to expect others to. It's just an excuse. It just hides behind. So to me, that's another one of those conveniences. I can't do enough, and therefore I won't do anything. It's like, I won't put my $1 into the collection tin, because what will $1 do? Well, actually, if we all took the view that we would put $1 in, then there'll be billions of dollars available to make things better. So it's just a flipping excuse. I think it's a convenient smoke screen that we hide behind, and we've hidden behind. It's another one of those big lies to me, like the I'll do it tomorrow bit. So then try to drill down into what's a really, really practical first step. And it is only a first step, but I think the most practical first step each one of us can do in our businesses is to pledge to offset our carbon footprint. In fact, better than that, to double offset, so that we become carbon negative. Now, offsetting is only part of the solution, because ultimately, we're planting trees somewhere else, or we're sponsoring some behavioral change somewhere else. That's great. That will ultimately make a real net difference to the carbon that's emitted around the world. But we each have to do more than offsetting. But offsetting is great because we can do it today. We go back to this need to take action now. It's quite hard for most of us to put in solar panels today, or a heat exchanger, or get rid of our car today, or whatever else it is. That's quite hard. But actually, what's really easy is to go public with a pledge that we're going to be carbon negative through offsetting. So actually, we're going to more than offset our carbon footprint. There's a thing called the Pledge for Our Planet, which allows us very simply, especially in white collar businesses, as we are as accountants, to offset both our office footprint and the footprint of our entire teams. B1G and the charity has a public declaration that we can make called #Pledge for Our Planet. And it's brilliantly simple. We can each sign up to it. through our businesses, we can offset the complete carbon footprint of the average American or the average European or the average Southeast Asian or Australasian. So it's an average for our continent. What I would suggest is actually double offsetting. So take whatever they suggest is the average carbon footprint of an employee and double it. Then we know for a fact that even if we're heavy users, we're actually we're contributing negatively towards the carbon footprint rather than positively. It's not enough, but it's a great thing to do. And the reason why I would take that as the first action and go public with that, because it's a hashtag, so that we can put it on social media and put it on our websites and make this declaration: we are going to be a carbon negative business immediately through offsetting. Once we go public with it, a couple of things happen, of course. We have to explain it to our team. We have to live up to it. We're going to be held accountable in some way, shape, or form by ourselves, by our people, by our clients. It's going to start triggering conversations. What's that about? Why have you done that? How do you do that? By going public around this pledge for our planet, what we're able to do is make it much less likely that we backtrack, much less likely that we fall off the wagon, much more likely that we act as a sort of inspirational beacon. Now, I say I don't think it's enough, but I think it's a great first step. And the brilliant thing is that we can take that first step immediately. It's just a binary choice. Do we care enough to do that immediately or not?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I love what you're saying, Steve. And I love that starfish story. Absolutely love the starfish story. I made a difference to that one.
Yeah.
And that's something that we can do in every moment with our choices. And I love that you touched on the idea of zero-sum game. I actually had a fantastic conversation just this last week with Clayton Oates, who's currently in the United States for the Accounting Web Conference. And we were talking about the finite game versus the infinite game, which is basically zero-sum game and positive sum game. This idea that we can create win-wins out of just about anything if we simply try. And if we're willing to expand our own viewpoint to recognize that we can do that and we can make a difference to that one. And by focusing on the differences that we're making and keeping our outlook positive, sure, it sounds like a very optimistic viewpoint. And you know what? In climate action, optimism is a big part of what's needed. Mm-hmm. We have to, if we get super depressed and overwhelmed by the enormity of the issue, yeah, it makes us feel paralyzed, because what can I do? I'm just me. I'm just a human. I can't do anything all by myself. But yes, $1 when taken, by our population is a pretty big impact. And we don't have to each of us do it on our own. It's about each of us saying, you know what, I'm going to help that one. And so long as each of us is doing something and working to be more aware and make more effective choices, then collectively we are moving in the right direction. Yeah.
I agree with you completely. And I think it's hugely important that each and every one of us recognizes that is something we need to start doing now, today, not tomorrow, not next week, certainly not next year, and definitely not in 5 years' time or the end of the electoral cycle, but now.
Yeah.
Take that leadership role ourselves. And I love the idea of going public with that kind of pledge, because it also then creates the platform to say to our team and to our clients, actually, not only are we committed to being carbon negative, we're already achieving that through, and the way that B1G1 structures their carbon offset bundles, and I think this is genius, is it's a combination of planting trees. Trees are fantastic, but they take quite a long while to sequester much carbon. So a tree is a long-term solution, especially if it's a fruit tree. I love the fact planting a fruit tree, because not only does it sequester carbon, but it provides food, and the surplus food is income, and it helps lift families up. But trees alone are potentially too long-term a solution. So we need to balance that with things that have a much more immediate impact. And on the other end of the spectrum, the B1G1 bundles, for example, include rescuing food from US restaurants that would otherwise throw it away, So you have a team of volunteers that go into restaurants and take the food, which is can't be sold at the end of the day on the regular menu, but is still perfectly edible. And then they repurpose it, check that it's safe, and then distribute it through to the homeless and to others in need through food banks and so on. Now that not only helps the homeless and tackles the food poverty issue that we're facing and all those issues, but the food that would otherwise have gone into landfill and then emitted all sorts of carbon related and other problems doesn't go into landfill, it gets properly used. And we don't need to grow a second amount of food to feed the homeless with all the carbon footprint of the replacement food. We just use the food that would otherwise been thrown away. So there's a much more immediate solution to multiple social problems, homelessness, food poverty and carbon footprint. And I love solutions which are more creative. Trees is what we instantly think of, and they are definitely part of the solution, but they need, I think, to be balanced with more immediate change, which also helps tackle other very real issues that we're facing, around the world, in our own towns and globally around the world. And I think that's one of the genius of the way that B1G1 have put together their carbon bundles, that they include that entire spectrum of projects.
Absolutely. So let's talk about solutions and activities that people can. You've mentioned B1G1 several times, which I would just want to say stands for Buy One, Give One, correct?
That's what it originally. I mean, yes, it is technically correct. Yes, it's a charity that allows us to link things that are happening in our business with positive impacts in the world. It doesn't necessarily have to be triggered by buying something. It could be triggered by receiving a testimonial or sending out an invoice. I always use these cards, and Ingrid, you'll have seen me use them, won't you? But imagine if every time something good happened in your business, it triggered something good in the world. So imagine if every time you met a prospect, a tree was planted, or every time you turned a prospect into a customer, a child was educated for a day, and every time you sent out an invoice, a homeless person was fed one of these meals that was repurposed from collection from a restaurant, and so on and so forth. Imagine if every time good things happened in the business, a tiny fraction of the good fortune of the business spilt out into the world to tackle problems like climate change, poverty, hunger, inequality, and so on. So as the business becomes more successful, so does the world become a better place. That's the core idea that B1G1 makes possible. And then essentially it's like a big online shop for kindness. I call it Amazon for kindness. All these acts of kindness, planting trees, feeding the homeless, and so on, we can find and fund through their big online shop. And you can feed a homeless American for 12 US cents, for example. You can plant a tree in India for 22 cents. You can provide vitamin supplements to children in Kenya from 1 cent a day, and so on and so forth. There are all these projects that we can fund for a very small amount of money, and therefore make it realistic to link like this. So that's a cultural change that we can build into our businesses, so that our businesses start to make a more profound difference on the world automatically. And then we have a story to tell in the marketplace. When you become a customer, a tree is planted. When we send you an invoice, a child is fed. When you give us a testimonial or follow us on social media, a homeless person is fed, or whatever we choose to make that linkage. So yeah, it's not just triggered by purchase, buy one, give one, but it's this, we decide what the trigger is, and we decide what the impact is that makes the world a better place, whether that's climate change related or any other act of kindness that moves the dial forward in a positive way, like the starfish. This is one of those starfish kind of moments, except there's thousands of different ways we could do it.
Well, and it's creating systems. So rather than walking down the beach and tossing one starfish at a time, now we've created a system where we've invented a machine that goes and gently collects the starfish and plants them all back in the ocean.
That's it. And I people talk about random acts of kindness. I love random acts of kindness. If we randomly planted trees or fed a homeless person, that's lovely. That's beautiful. But how much more powerful would systematic acts of kindness be? So rather than just be something that happens randomly from time to time, what if every single time we won a customer, a tree was planted, and every single time we sent out an invoice, a homeless person was fed, and so on? Then that's systematic. That's the machine. Our business becomes a machine that makes the world a better place systematically, yes, automatically. And then that flows through the business. That's culturally embedded. That's technologically embedded as well, because we can have that technologically linked up so that, QuickBooks, every time we set up a new customer account in QuickBooks, it plants a tree. because that's when we set up an account because we just won a new client or whatever. So it's so easy to turn our businesses into machines for doing good in the world, machines for tackling climate change. And then, of course, that becomes part of our brand story, our marketing. People start talking about us. People start wanting to work with us, either work for us as talent or work with us as clients, because they share those values. Because that's the other thing that's hugely exciting about it. I mean, I think we look at these issues with two hats. We look at these hats as human beings, which is what we have been looking at. You know, as grandparents, can we look our grandchildren in the eyes? As human beings, it clearly makes sense to do something about these risks, to play a leadership role, doing something about these climate change risks. But if we wear our second hat as human calculators, particularly us as accountants, are human calculators, and we use our analytical skills to say, does this stack up commercially, financially? You know, so as human calculators, what does the evidence say? And again, with your permission, I'd love to share some research from last year from Deloitte, because I mean, there's lots of research, but this is topical. And as accountants, I think this will particularly resonate with us. So let me just make sure this is the bit of research I wanted to share with you. So last year, the summer last year, so this is about 10 months old now, so still very contemporary, Deloitte published a major report called the Purpose Premium. And they looked at the commercial payback for having a clear and consistent purpose, having a brand that stood for more than just making money, that was in some way serving society. And it's not just about climate change, but it's having a visible purpose that people bought into and believed. And this is just the infographic that summarized their report. There's pages and pages of the report, but this is just the infographic. And you can see there's all sorts of percentages on there looking at all sorts of different benefits. But the two I've highlighted in yellow towards the bottom left-hand corner are, I think, amongst the most striking. So Deloitte's found that the purpose premium in terms of how much more customers would be willing to pay for products and services was 39.5%. Now, I've personally never seen a 39% price uplift, but even if it was 3.9%, just imagine if, because of the values of the business, because what you're doing resonates and is bought into as the right thing by your customers, that they're willing to pay a little bit more. Now, Deloitte's found 39.5%. And they found all these other, cost savings and enhancements in employee retention and employee attraction, recruitment, and reduced costs and reduced risks and increased brand valuation. Bottom line, the bottom left-hand corner is perhaps the most interesting of all. They found that a business, the premium in terms of ultimately how much does this add up to making your business worth, because all the things we do in our business, the profit flows that we create multiplied by some kind of multiple, create a valuation, which perhaps is what we cash in when we come to sell or retire. How much value are we building in our business? What Deloitte's found was 4 times as much value if you have a purpose-driven business. So if we wear our human calculator hats, why on earth would we not structure our businesses to tap into these kinds of commercial paybacks? And given that dovetails brilliantly when we wear our human being hat, which says, is this the right thing to do morally, ethically, whether it's from a spiritual perspective, I'm not sure there are many faiths in the world that basically say, no, actually, you should be really selfish and you should do stuff that's purely in your interest, regardless of the cost to everybody else. Actually, it doesn't matter one iota about other people. I don't think that's where faiths come from. So whether it's a moral, a spiritual, a religious, a hard-nosed commercial perspective, it absolutely makes sense to do something about this.
Yeah. And
yet we hide behind the excuse, I can't do anything, or I'll do it tomorrow. The Mathew excuse, the one that you articulated, Mathew, well, I'm so small, what difference can I make? That's the starfish response, and we'll do it tomorrow. That's the big lie. In fact, both of those are big lies. The reality is only we can do something, only we can be sure of something happening because we make it happen ourselves. If we rely on other people, we're always dependent on them doing it. But if we do it ourselves, we can absolutely move the dial a tiny bit. And then as more and more of us get that, we can all start to move the dial a big bit.
Great. I just going to throw some other things in here to guide the conversation. Yes, and so I'm with you. but then I'm also working at this company and like nobody else is doing the work, or the corporation that I work for is saying, oh, this work is important, right? And so they're, you know, giving me the day of volunteer service or whatever, right? And they're doing the thing that you know, the public sees them doing. And so I get curious about how, like, what is your advice or your insight around helping organizations to transform, not just on an individual level or a leadership level, but collectively as an organization? How can an organization evolve? And then subsequently, you know, when I see that, you know, it's like when I go to the store and I look at the, you know, organic, non-GMO, non-this, non-that, that product, it's like $4 or $5 or more than the product that is not that. And so I think the other issue that comes up for me, which is sort of I'm hinting at that poster in the back of your room there, is there are other issues that play here, like economic issues or financial access issues. Like, yeah, I would love to, but I can't afford to do the organic thing because it's just not in my price. How do you address that?
And you're absolutely right. We probably can't all afford, whether it's from a time perspective or a money perspective, to do everything. But let's not use that as an excuse for doing nothing. Let's change the aspects of our behavior that we can change. Maybe we can't, you know, go to organic food, or maybe we don't want to. Maybe we don't want to cut out red meat from our diet. So maybe we don't do that either. Don't use that as an excuse for not doing something. Do what you can. Do as much as you can in the areas that are easiest for you. I go back to why. Let's start with the easy stuff. Let's make the easy changes, the quick changes, the things that have the least pain, but nevertheless can make a difference. And let's use that to start to build some momentum. So let's not think about a single example of something which is impossible and use that as a reason not to do anything else, because there are plenty of those single examples that are impossible. And we all very often say, well, I can't do that because, and we pick a single isolated instance, and then because of that, I won't actually do anything. So I think that's hugely important. In terms of bringing, I mean, you alluded to what's over on my shelf over there, which is actually, I've got the same thing here and I'm wearing the badge as I always do. Back in 2015, every single civilized country in the world, so certainly, you know, the country that each of us watching this comes from, signed up to a set of 17 global goals. They're referred to as the Sustainable Development Goals or the UN Global Goals, but every single one of our countries signed up to these so they were set in 2015 to be achieved by 2030. Now we are 7 years into that cycle. We only have 8 years to go. These were goals, and really specific, quantified goals to eliminate poverty and make sure that no one went hungry, and give everyone access to clean water and sanitation and education. And number 13 was to address climate change and so on. There were 17 of these goals. For me, climate change is an existential issue, yes, but it is only one of these 17 problems. And quite frankly, we have to collectively, globally tackle all of these problems, because as we found with COVID, a problem that starts somewhere else, if we don't tackle it on a global level, will spill out. You know, COVID spilled out across the world, started in China, spilled out across the world. You know, the Russians invade Ukraine, the consequences of that are spilling out across the world. We are having, you know, fuel crises and food crises and shortages. And the humanitarian crisis is obviously the first one, but problems spill out across the world. And ultimately, if we don't tackle poverty and hunger and indeed climate change over there, wherever over there is, the people that are over there that are suffering are going to want to come over here because it's safer and better and easier. And they're either going to come over here in little rubber dinghies across the English Channel, or in big tanks and, you know, military aircraft. The point is that we have a collective responsibility and a collective imperative to tackle these global problems. So I mentioned all of that because, go back to this idea of how do we motivate and best engage everyone in our business, so it's not a top-down directive, or it's not just an individual isolated pocket of determination to do something, but everybody buys in. And my suggestion would be to see, for each of us in our businesses, to see climate change as one of the 17 key issues that need addressing, and then to get our teams together and say, look, there are these 17 global goals. You know, our government we as a country signed up to these goals. Actually, globally, we are well behind where we need to be, which is the case. And the reason we are well behind on each of those goals is the same reason that we're well behind on climate action, which is we've hid behind the "we'll do it tomorrow" excuse, and the excuse that we're too small, there's nothing we can do. So why not within our businesses say we're going to do everything we can in some of those areas, but why not let the team, the people, decide where the focus is? So it may be that you go somewhere like the B1G, and I described it as a big, Amazon for kindness, a big online shop where we can find and fund all sorts of projects from as little as $1 or 12 cents to feed a homeless American or whatever, or 22 cents to plant a tree, and so on. If we get our people together and say, look, there are 17 goals that the world is facing. We probably can't tackle them all, but we can make a contribution in the areas that we feel most strongly about, in the areas that resonate most with us. So as a team, which of these, in B1G1's terms, hundreds of projects would you like us to find a way of linking success in our business to success in the world? And if the team chooses to feed a homeless American every time we win a client, and if the team chooses to vaccinate a street dog against rabies every time we get a social media follower, 1 cent a day, for example, or if the point is, if the team shapes the good things that the business unlocks in the world, then the team owns, the team believes, the team is committed, the team is excited about that progress. And in fact, what the team will want to do then is to make more of this happen. Let's make more sales. Let's get more social media followers. Let's send out more invoices, because that way we make progress on the things that matter to us, whether it's the planting trees or whatever. So instead of this being something which is dropped from a great height, a CEO directive, this is something which is built from within. And then we have the momentum, then we have the ownership, then we have the shared belief that this matters, this shared commitment to making it happen. And then our whole businesses become aligned. Now, we won't all support exactly the same 17 global goals. We won't support all exactly the same projects. That doesn't matter. Collectively across millions of businesses, just imagine if millions of businesses across the world built that kind of thinking, that kind of process into their behaviors, into their cultures, into what their team were empowered to make happen. Tiny fraction of the revenues that the business earns just get used in this kind of way, and potentially then, you could be the cost of doing that would be tiny, but we go back to what Deloitte's found, the payback from doing that in terms of team engagement and brand story and reputational benefits and higher prices that some customers might be willing to pay, and additional productivity and all the benefits that Deloitte's and many, many other research studies have found. It hangs together, and suddenly we've got a business which is really inspiring for the people within it, because there's real purpose, and it's their purpose. They've chosen the projects and therefore the focus. They've chosen them from the 17, which is why I think whilst climate change is existentially and fundamentally important to me, it is but one of the 17 key areas.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, I really like what you're sharing, because it creates the space for people to gather as an organization, or I'm going to use the word community, because an organization is a community, as a community, and say, hey, these are the issues that are really important to us within this framework. And then they can begin to build an if this, then that relationship to, okay. And I like that you even said, like, oh, we get a new social media follower, we do this thing, we get a new client, we do this thing, we get an invoice paid, we do this thing. Like they could literally be that granular, where it could be almost become gamified.
I think it should be, and it actually is gamified, but there's nothing wrong with that. That's brilliant.
It's just making it even more of a positive sum game.
Sorry, Ingrid?
Just making it even more of a positive sum game. Oh,
absolutely.
Let's make this fun while we're at it.
And in fact, I would go further. I think I call this business 17.0 because of the 17 of these things. But I think our whole business structure and culture and almost every dimension can be changed. I'll give you one example: goal setting. We can reframe our traditional goals and targets into impact goals. So a specific example: imagine that you run a coffee shop and your goal is to make $1 million in profit. And I don't know what the profitability of a coffee shop is, but imagine that you make one make it really simple. You make $1 profit per cup of coffee you sell. So you've got to sell 1 million cups of coffee, you make $1 million. Let's assume that were conventionally, as accountants, we would help our clients to express their goals in terms of 1 million sales or $3 million turnover, because maybe it's $3 a cup of coffee, $3 million turnover, that's $1 million profit. Our goal setting has traditionally been measured in terms of these things, the things that are good for us. But what if we took the goals of the business and reframe them in terms of these? What if the goal of that coffee shop, instead of making £1 million profit, $1 million profit, was to provide 1 million days of clean water to people in need, so that they don't get ill and they're able to still go to school rather than have to take days off, don't have stunted development, and so on and so. What if the goal of the business was turned into 1 million days of clean water? Now, and what if that was achieved because every cup of coffee unlocked a day of water? Now, we can instantly see that the two goals, a goal of 1 million cups of 1 million days of water provided to people in need, or $1 million profit, are exactly the same. That's 1 million cups of coffees that we need to achieve that. But you tell me which of those two goals is more motivating to the team. You come here to work because the purpose of this business is to make $1 million for the owner. That's the usual articulation of goal setting or targets. Or when you work here, our goal is together, working with our customers, working as a team, to provide 1 million days of help to people in need around the world. Now, I think the second one is a fundamentally different and better story. It's exactly the same mathematically, but what if we could take all of our goals and reframe them so they were impact goals rather than conventional financial goals? And then we have this alignment between the success of our business and the success in the world. And by the way, to unlock a year's worth of clean water, so 365 days of clean water using solar pumps, so they're also low carbon footprint, so that extracts the water from a deep borehole using solar powered pumps, is about $1.20. So less than a third a cent a day. So around about, what's that, 3,000, I forget whether that's $3,000 or $300 for a 3 million turnover. It's tiny. It's a tiny amount. So what you've got for a tiny amount of money is we make the world a better place, and we are much more likely to achieve our goals, and we can go to market with a goal. If a coffee shop put in its window and told its customers, our goal is to make $1 million profit from you, customers are actually going to go the other way. They're going to turn away from that business. But if you put in the window, our goal is because of you, Mr. Customer, that we give you lovely coffee, but also we make a lovely difference in the world by unlocking 1 million days of help, I go to that coffee shop.
Yeah.
But it's the same goal reframed.
Yeah.
By putting impact at the heart rather than conventional financial metrics. And I think once we start thinking about, this is one of the reasons why accountants can play a leadership role in this area, because almost everything, whether it's the research that Deloitte found that we're going to have more successful businesses with more engaged teams, and we can charge higher prices, and we're going to have a higher business valuation, all which is great core accounting insight that we should be sharing with our clients so they build those kinds of ideas into their businesses. And then we can show them exactly how to do that by building something as simple as this into their business. And in fact, shameless plug, but given that I give this away rather than sell it, I've written a book called Our Time to Rise. I would love to give a copy to every single member of this group, and love you to give a copy to every single one of your clients. It's free. It's on Amazon for $45. I don't want to sell a single copy. It shows exactly how we can do these things. So it's my gift to the world, effectively. I co-wrote it with Paul Dunn, my hero and very dear friend. But and I've created a whole raft of other resources I would love to give to everyone in this group. They are free to you. They are free to everybody. I'm retired now, and in retirement, I'm trying to use what voice I have, what audience I can get, what skill I have at writing stuff and codifying things and bringing them together to make resources available that start unlocking thinking and unlocking impact in the world. And my personal goal, by the way, is that by 2030, by which point I will be almost 70, which is probably when I will properly retire. So the deadline for the UN Global Goals, my goal is to help unlock 100 million days of help for people in need around the world.
Wow.
And we're at about just under 30 million days so far, because again, through the B1G1 charity, I have a way of measuring the combined impact that all of us in my little community, which is a community I support for free. There is no product in the background that I'm trying to sell there. There is no training program with a price tag attached. This is just I could have gone and worked in a charity shop at this point in my life as a retired person, but instead I've chosen to act as a volunteer in this field instead, because I felt I could make more difference. It's unlikely in a charity shop I could help provide 100 million days of help, whereas this way, I think we're genuinely on target for doing that.
Yes. So I want to acknowledge we have just a handful of minutes left, and I want to get back. You mentioned resources, and just touching really briefly on some resources for some of our viewers watching this today. I recently learned of a fantastic TED Talk that I can post on the Accounting Alchemy Network. I can grab the link and stick it up there. Basically, someone talking about one of the best things that we can do to take action on these important issues is to simply talk about them.
Yeah.
So right now, this call right here, we are taking action. This is what action looks like. And for someone watching this, for someone joining in the conversation in Accounting Alchemy Network, that is an action step. That is a very important action step. So simply talking about it is such a great start. The next piece is educating ourselves. And Steve, you were talking so much wonderfully about, some of the different things that we can do on a more active level, and to learn what kinds of things, because sometimes it takes a little while to figure out which action steps might be a fit for each of us. Yeah. There are some really great resources out there. One of my favorites, Steve, have you seen the fantastic documentary Kiss the Ground?
I haven't, no.
It's wonderful. It's narrated by Woody Harrelson, and it talks about how simply taking good care of our soil by not tilling it over and then spraying it with harsh chemicals that kill the microbiome, all of the fantastic mycelium and other microorganisms in the soil, by simply taking effective care of our soil, we can reverse global warming in the next couple of decades. And it talks about how we as accounting professionals can be educating our clients. Hey, have you heard about this fantastic documentary? Especially if you are an accounting professional who works with farmers or works with people in the cannabis industry or something like that. Those clients will be more profitable if they employ these agricultural techniques that are not hard on our soil. And carbon sequestration is a natural thing that our planet wants to do, and we can help our planet do that, and we can spread the word about that. But there are large corporations such as Monsanto who are making a gigantic profit from killing the microbiome in the soil and then selling fertilizers that the soil will then need to grow the plants because you've killed off the microbiome. It doesn't have to be that way. And by changing our farming practices, we can turn that around on a single plot of land in a year or two. It is amazing how quick these things can change. Yeah. And another fantastic resource that I just turned Steve onto, what was it, last week, is the Pachamama Alliance. Pachamama.org has a fantastic online course called Awakening the Dreamer. It's just 2 hours. You can do it in an evening instead of watching Netflix sometime, and it's wonderful to watch with your family. Steve, I would love to hear really briefly your impressions of that, since you just saw it recently.
I loved it so much. I posted about it, I think, in this group, didn't I? Or at least somewhere on Facebook. And if you watch it, and I'm just going to say, watch out for the butterfly metaphor. When you get to the butterfly metaphor, it will stop you in your tracks. It certainly stopped me in mine. I'm not going to tell you what it is. Well, you know already, Ingrid. I'm not going to tell anybody else what it is, because that's my that's just priceless in itself. I mean, the whole thing is fantastic, but the butterfly thing just made me go, oh my goodness, wow. And it's so hopeful. It's so potentially positive. So yeah, it's awesome. And as you say, it's one, and it pointed me to lots of other really wonderful things as well, which I'm still sort of drilling into. Yes, you're absolutely right. Talking about this, not in a despondent doom and gloom kind of way. And I know I start off by saying that climate change could lead to all these horrible things. For sure, we need to understand the context, but overwhelmingly our focus shouldn't be on the problem. Our focus should be on the change, on the positive things that we can do. and that we really must start doing. And that's why, again, we as accountants, because we have the ear, we have a trusted relationship with so many other people, let's use that trusted relationship in a way that creates a better future for everyone we care about, for those that are alive now that we care about and those that are still to come. Let's help pull them back from the edge of that cliff, and let's be able to look them in the eye and say we did everything we could, and we certainly did more than we used to.
Thank you so much. So we are coming right up on the top of the hour. And I guess I would just love to also mention, we've posted a couple in the past, but I know, Steve, you do fantastic webinars. And you mentioned that you don't have any coming up right in the near future because you're moving house right now.
Yeah.
But when you do have more of your wonderful webinars that go even deeper on climate action, we would love to have you post those opportunities in the Accounting Alchemy Network so we can stay in the loop on those. And I highly recommend anyone who's watching this, keep an eye out for Steve's webinars. Maybe get on Steve's email list. Where can people do that if they want?
I will do that. I will do that with pleasure. Well, the easiest thing is if anybody wants to reach out to me, steve@stevepike.com. There you go, steve@stevepike.com. I will send you everything that I've got and everything I've alluded to here and talked about, and much more of that. But I'll send it in a structured kind of useful way, I hope. And I will be here for everyone in this group, and indeed anyone else. Pick my brains, run things past me, challenge me. I just want to use what little insight and energy I have left as a 60-year-old to try and move the dial a little bit. And everything I create will be for you and available to you. You can use it with your clients. You can change it and tweak it and sell it and make money from it. I'm not interested in doing that myself, but I think there's a real opportunity for us as a profession to launch impact advisory services to help our clients reduce their footprint, to help our clients do something about these too. And I've created a whole load of resources that will make it easy for you to do that. I'll give them to you for free. You can, the more they're distributed, the more impact we collectively make. So that's why there's no price tag slowing this down or getting in the way. I'm retired, I'm living up, we're selling our house to move to one that's much more environmentally friendly. We'll have solar panels and a heat exchanger and so on and so forth. I've sold my car already. We have one tiny car left. That'll be replaced with an electric car shortly. We're trying to do other things in our life as well as these kind of things. But actually, I think potentially the greatest impact that we can each have is doing things like Ingrid and Matthew have done, which is start the conversations, galvanize other people to recognize what's possible and play our part. And that can be a small part, but all of those small parts add up. Do as much as we can. Don't get put off by the things we don't have time for or don't have the money for. Do as much as we can, because that's still a damn sight better than doing nothing at all.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I would love to, I guess, leave us off with just a little challenge for our viewers. Anyone who's watching this, try to think of what is one thing, even just one thing that you can do today, in this moment, even right now, as you're watching this. What is one thing that you can do? Recognizing that you are doing something by watching this, that's something. What is one thing that you can do today to make a positive impact in our world? Whether it be checking out that webinar, checking out one of Steve's webinars, checking out the Kiss the Ground documentary, going to pachamama.org, recycling, something that you can do today. And any final closing thoughts from Steve or Matthew?
I'll just remind everybody, for those of you who are a part of the Accounting Alchemy Network, we have a couple of other events coming up as well. June 1st, we have our first community gathering collectively. So we posted a ton of great content on our social feeds. So we figured, hey, why not come together and talk about some of this juicy content as a community? And then also we have our book club coming up on June 6th. It's the beginning of that, on Sacred Economics by Charles Eisenstein. So
such a good book.
Some good stuff, good juicy stuff going on over here. Yeah, Steve, any other final thoughts or comments or words of wisdom before we close out?
A huge thank you to you guys for inviting me, but much more fundamental than that, for making these kind of conversations and bringing this kind of agenda and this kind of purpose-driven group together. That's awesome. If we don't do something, I mean, each of them, every one of us, if we don't do something more today than we were doing yesterday, we'll never do anything at all. So it almost doesn't matter what you do first, whether it's a small thing. If my single, I guess I go back to what I said before, was taking that pledge for our planet, going public with a declaration to more than offset the carbon footprint of our team and our office is a really powerful, easy and quick thing to do. I will, and it may well be tomorrow, but once this is up on Facebook, I'll put some details in the comments underneath as to how people can do that.
Fantastic.
And that's a great place to start.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. Well, this is such a great conversation. Thank you so much, Steve, for joining us today. And yeah, we look forward to continuing the conversation with you and everyone else in the Alchemy Network on Facebook and LinkedIn. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. Ciao.
Thank you.
Bye.